You are watching one of the most expensive military miscalculations in modern history. A superpower that calculated it would end a war in 3 days has spent more than 2 years staring at the wreckage of its own military machine. So how did this happen? What decisions triggered this collapse? And most critically, where is this war going? Today, drawing on verified field data, we break down exactly how and why Russia has stumbled in Ukraine. Some findings will surprise you. Others will reveal just how deep what you already suspected actually goes. Stay until the end. The final section contains the most critical piece for understanding where this war heads next. February 24, 2022. Early morning hours. Russian military planners had a flawless scenario in mind: seize Hostomel airport, establish an air bridge to Kiev, topple the Ukrainian government, sign the capitulation. 3 days. Maybe 5. Hostomel sits just 25 kilometers northwest of Kiev. Home to the world's largest cargo aircraft, the Antonov Tu-25, this airport was as symbolic as it was strategically valuable. If Russia could hold it, heavy transport aircraft carrying weapons and supplies would land directly at Kiev's doorstep, and the city would be encircled, not in hours, but perhaps in days. The first wave arrived. Approximately 200 Russian VDV troops, the elite of the Vozdushnodesantnaya Voyska, Russia's airborne forces, landed by helicopter. Ukrainian National Guard units initially fell back. The Russians temporarily secured the airport. But that is where the plan began to unravel. Ukraine had been preparing for exactly this kind of scenario since 2014. NATO advisors, particularly American and British military personnel, had trained Ukrainian forces in modern urban defense tactics. Ukrainian units surrounding the airport decisively blocked reinforcement movements from both ground and air. More critically, the second wave Russia planned to launch with an Il-24 and Il-76 transport aircraft never came. Ukrainian air defenses and the pressure of Ukrainian ground forces made the airport effectively unusable. The runway was damaged, fuel supply lines were cut, perimeter security could not be established. Russia had taken the airport. But the airport was useless. What followed were those now famous satellite images of a convoy stretching 64 kilometers along the roads north of Kiev, images that dominated global media. The operational reality was as stark as the psychological impact. Fuel-depleted tanks, heavy vehicles mired in mud, supply lines exposed to Ukrainian artillery fire. Ukrainian artillery exploited this. Critical nodes within the convoy, fuel vehicles, command elements, were struck. Russia failed to approach within 30 kilometers of Kiev. By late March 2022, Russian forces withdrew from the Kiev region. The Kremlin framed this as a gesture of goodwill and a contribution to negotiations. The data on the ground told a different story. In the middle of the Black Sea, roughly 35 kilometers offshore, lies a small rocky outcrop, Snake Island. Its strategic value is considerable, it commands the surrounding maritime zone. Ukraine maintained a small naval garrison there. On that same morning of February 24, 2022, the flagship of Russia's Black Sea Fleet, the cruiser Moskva, approached the island and called on the Ukrainian defenders to surrender. And then it happened. The response over the radio became, in the fullest sense of the word, history, Russian warship, go F*** yourself. The Ukrainian guardsman's reply went viral globally within hours. While President Zelensky was sending video messages to the world proving he was still in Kiev, the brave garrison of this tiny island was becoming the symbol of Ukrainian resistance. Russia initially announced that the defenders had been killed. The truth was different: the Ukrainian soldiers had been taken prisoner and were later released through a prisoner exchange. This detail matters on its own, it reveals how quickly and carelessly the Russian propaganda machine operates. What was the real weight of this moment? In modern warfare, the information environment can be as decisive as artillery. Ukraine leveraged social media, video broadcasts, and international press with exceptional skill from the first hours of the invasion. Zelensky's video from the streets of Kiev, "I am here, I am not fleeing," was viewed hundreds of millions of times. Snake Island's defiant reply became the perfect piece of that narrative. Russia, by contrast, was clearly left behind in this domain. Its state media's mass disinformation lost credibility in the international arena rapidly. The special military operation framing found no resonance in Western media. And this asymmetry deepened Russia's diplomatic and economic isolation further. The Moskva, flagship of Russia's Black Sea Fleet, a Slava-class cruiser stretching 186 meters, was underway hundreds of kilometers from the Ukrainian coast. 2 Neptune missiles struck it. The Neptune is an anti-ship cruise missile developed by Ukraine's domestic defense industry. With a range of approximately 300 kilometers, it travels at low altitude to complicate radar detection. Deliveries to the Ukrainian armed forces began in 2021, just 1 year before the invasion. The Moskva sank overnight on April 14 to 15. Russia announced 1 crew member dead from a complement of 510. Ukraine and several Western intelligence sources suggested the actual figure was considerably higher. The precise casualty count remains disputed. This was the largest Russian warship sunk in combat since World War II. But the key question must be asked: the Moskva carried the S-300F forward air defense system. Theoretically, this system could detect and neutralize incoming missiles. Why was it not activated? Several possible explanations emerge from various analyses. First, operational negligence. The crew may not have kept the system in readiness. Second, coordination failure. It has been suggested the attack occurred in multiple phases, a drone first diverting attention, then the missiles launched. Third, more troubling, the possibility that the system did not perform to its expected capability. Whichever explanation holds, the outcome is unchanged. The symbol of Russia's Black Sea naval power was sent to the bottom by Ukraine's domestically manufactured missiles. Following this incident, Russia's Black Sea Fleet largely withdrew from operations near Ukraine's coastline. Against the expectations of international observers, Ukraine, with virtually no navy of its own, had effectively broken Russian maritime dominance. One of the foundational assumptions of modern war doctrine is this: whoever establishes air superiority most likely wins the land war too. The 1991 Gulf War, 1999 Kosovo, 2003 Iraq, these examples seem to confirm the doctrine. Ukraine shook that assumption. At the invasion's outset, Russia planned to swiftly destroy Ukraine's air defense infrastructure. Ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and electronic warfare systems targeted Ukrainian radars, command centers, and airfields. Yet Ukraine's air force, against expectations, stayed airborne. Several critical factors explain this. First, manpads. Man-portable air defense systems, shoulder-fired, portable anti-aircraft weapons. The FIM-92 Stinger and various other manpad systems were transferred to Ukraine in substantial quantities by NATO countries from the first days of the invasion. These systems are inexpensive, portable, and highly effective. They can be deployed at any location, and their radar signatures are difficult to detect. Russia had not adequately accounted for this threat. The result: Russian pilots were forced to fly at 5,000 meters and above to avoid manpad's range. At that altitude, precision targeting becomes extremely difficult. Providing coordinated close air support to ground forces becomes nearly impossible. The second critical factor: Ukraine's inherited Soviet-era S-300 air defense system. It was assumed these would be eliminated at the invasion's outset. Yet Ukrainian units managed to keep them alive by constantly repositioning, concealing them, and sometimes creating decoy positions. Subsequently, Patriot, NASAMS, and other Western-supplied systems further reinforced this defensive network. Third, Russia's aircraft losses are sobering. According to independent monitoring organizations, Russia has lost more than 100 fixed-wing aircraft since the war began, some to Ukrainian air defenses, some, remarkably, to friendly fire incidents. The conclusion: despite possessing overwhelming air power on paper compared to Ukraine, Russia could not translate this superiority into actual air control. True air dominance over Ukrainian skies was never achieved. Tanks. The backbone of modern land warfare. Russia entered the invasion with approximately 3,000 active tanks, a significant portion of them relatively modern platforms such as the T-72, T-80, and T-90. Today the picture is dramatically different. According to visual confirmations compiled by open-source intelligence platforms such as Oryx, Russia has lost over 2,000 tanks throughout the invasion. This figure includes not only completely destroyed vehicles but also those captured and those abandoned after being damaged. But the most striking development is this: Russia has turned to its storage depots to fill this gap. And what is in those depots? T-62s. Tanks designed in the 1960s, manufactured in the 1970s and 1980s. On the 21st century battlefield in Ukraine, 60-year-old armored vehicles. Beyond this, artillery ammunition produced and transferred by North Korea, Shahid series drones from Iran. The sources Russia has been forced to procure from externally make plain that its domestic defense industry cannot meet demand. Why have so many tanks been lost? Two fundamental reasons: tactical failures and the Javelin. Tactically, Russian armored units repeatedly advanced without infantry support. In modern warfare, tank-infantry coordination is vital. Infantry is the eyes that protect a tank from RPG fire. Ukraine exploited this coordination failure. It established ambushes around urban areas, waited at positions that appeared abandoned, and struck Russian tanks as they entered congested passages. The Javelin rewrote the equation. This American-made anti-tank guided missile operates on a fire-and-forget principle. The operator locks onto the target, pulls the trigger, then changes position. The missile tracks its target autonomously. More critically, the Javelin attacks from above. The most thinly armored part of a tank is its top surface. The Javelin therefore does not strike a tank's most fortified face but its most vulnerable point. Thousands of Javelins were sent to Ukraine throughout 2022 and beyond. The results were visible on the battlefield. September 2022. Putin declared partial mobilization. Official statements indicated 300,000 people would be called up. What happened after that announcement? Plane tickets to Finland, Georgia, Mongolia, and Kazakhstan sold out within hours. Google searches for "how to leave Russia" broke records. Queues stretching for kilometers formed at border crossings. Estimates suggest between 700,000 and 1 million Russian citizens left the country in the first few weeks. That alone is a significant indicator. But the real issue was the condition of those who were mobilized. Prisoner accounts from Ukraine, Western intelligence assessments, and reports from independent Russian journalists reveal a consistent picture. A significant portion of soldiers gathered in the September-October 2022 mobilization were sent to the front after just 5 to 11 days of training. This duration is plainly insufficient to teach basic weapons handling, field medicine, and tactical movement. Specific details in reports are striking. Some soldiers stated they received only 5 days of training after being called up. Reports indicate extremely high numbers were sent to the front without sleeping bags, winter clothing, or first aid kits. There are even reports of some units having to purchase their own weapons. Russia's calculation with this approach appeared to be: increase headcount, cover the gap created by casualties with raw numbers, have enough infantry mass to push through Ukrainian positions. The cost was steep. Untrained, unmotivated, and under-equipped forces could initially apply pressure to Ukrainian lines but could not sustain meaningful advances. Casualty rates remained extremely high. Data on Russia's total human losses is disputed. The U.S. Defense Department and various Western intelligence services estimate Russia has suffered between 150,000 and 200,000 soldiers killed or rendered combat ineffective in Ukraine. Ukrainian losses are also severe, but those figures are kept classified by the Ukrainian government. We come now to the bloodiest chapters of this war. Bakhmut. This small mining town in the Donbass became the most intense urban combat zone in the world for nearly 13 months. Wagner Group founder Yevgeny Prigozhin appeared personally in Frontline photographs, openly criticized the Russian Defense Ministry from his Telegram channels, and personally admitted to deploying pardoned prisoners in waves to the front. Russia took Bakhmut in May 2023. But at what cost? Ukraine withdrew from Bakhmut but held the surrounding high ground. Some analysts argue Bakhmut served Ukraine as a meat grinder strategy, a battlefield that consumed Russia's best units, allowing Ukrainian forces to attrit Russian strength while continuing to fall back. Others contest this reading and emphasize that Ukraine also suffered heavy losses in the defense. Avdiivka fell in early 2024. In February 2024, Ukrainian forces received withdrawal orders after command determined the town had become unsustainable to defend. This was one of the most significant Russian territorial gains in the Donbass since the early months of the war. Looking at today's territorial map, Russia controls approximately 17 to 18% of Ukrainian territory, including Crimea. The bulk of the Donbass is under Russian control. However, Ukraine's autumn 2022 counteroffensives in Kharkiv and Kherson recaptured significant amounts of territory. The war today has largely become positional in character. Along extended defensive lines, both sides are attempting to secure limited gains through costly assaults. Perhaps the most striking dimension of this war is the role played by unmanned aerial vehicles. Both sides deploy drones intensively, but the types and purposes differ. Russia uses Iranian-made Shahid-136 drones, now produced under license in Russia as Garan-2, primarily to strike Ukraine's energy infrastructure. These are one-way attack vehicles, meaning the munition is the drone itself. Their cost is estimated at roughly $20,000 to $50,000 each. When compared to the cost of Patriot or NASAMS missiles the other side uses to shoot them down, $1 to $4 million each, the economic asymmetry is striking. Ukraine's use of FPV, first-person view, drones has produced a battlefield revolution. Small, fast, and cheap, some costing only a few $100s on the commercial market, these drones can deliver results equivalent to an anti-tank missile. Ukraine produces or sources these drones largely through civilian volunteers and cooperatives. On the front, drone operators are today considered as valuable as special forces. This reality is fundamentally transforming the economics of modern warfare. Platforms worth millions of dollars are becoming destroyable by tools worth hundreds. Ukraine is not fighting this war alone. The United States has committed over $100 billion in assistance to Ukraine since February 2022. A significant portion of this is military in nature: HIMARS multiple launch rocket systems, Patriot air defense batteries, Abrams tanks, training programs for F-16 deliveries, and much more. The European Union and NATO members collectively assembled assistance packages exceeding $100 billion in total. Poland, Germany, the United Kingdom, France, and the Nordic countries have been among the most prominent contributors. HIMARS proved to be one of the most operationally effective military components of this assistance. Striking targets with precision-guided munitions at ranges of 80 kilometers, this system inflicted significant damage on Russian supply depots, command centers, and bridges behind the front lines. It is widely assessed to have laid the operational groundwork for the Kharkiv counteroffensive in the summer and autumn of 2022. However, this support has not been linear. Serious blockages emerged in the U.S. Congress, particularly in late 2023 and early 2024. The Ukrainian aid package was held up in the House of Representatives for months during January-April 2024. This delay led to ammunition shortages on the Ukrainian front and a reduction in fire intensity in some sectors. Europe worked to adopt a more independent posture during this period. The EU committed €50 billion in long-term financing under the Ukraine facility launched in 2024. We have reached this point. We have laid out all the data, the field realities, and the analyses. Now we arrive at the hardest question: where is this war going? Several scenarios must be evaluated with honesty. First scenario: negotiated freezing. The front line solidifies largely at its current position. Both sides lock into a stalemate, producing no major territorial changes. A de facto ceasefire-like stillness settles without any formal peace agreement. This scenario becomes plausible at the point where both sides are exhausted in terms of energy and motivation. However, Ukraine has repeatedly stressed it will not recognize Russian-controlled territories. Second scenario: Ukrainian counteroffensive. The summer of 2023 looked promising for this scenario. But the counteroffensive along the Zaporizhzhia axis failed to deliver the expected advances during June-August 2023. Russia's deep minefields and defensive lines blocked the movement of Ukrainian armored units. No major new counteroffensive was planned for 2024. Instead, a primarily defensive strategy was adopted. Third scenario: Russian collapse. Some analysts argue that Russia cannot sustain a war under the combined pressures of economic strain, human losses, and internal political turbulence. The Prigozhin mutiny, Wagner Group's quasi-armed march toward Moscow in June 2023, partially revealed this fragility. However, the mutiny ended unresolved, and Prigozhin died 2 months later in a suspicious plane crash. Fourth scenario: frozen conflict, a prolonged stalemate resembling the Korean Peninsula model. No formal peace agreement, but no major active hostilities either. Under this scenario, Ukraine might set aside the territorial integrity question and focus on Western institutional integration and economic reconstruction. None of these scenarios is definitive. Each has both advocates and critics. What can be said? Ukraine has remained standing far longer than any analyst predicted in February 2022. And Russia could never have planned for a war that would stretch not 3 days but 3+ years. The forces shaping this conflict, technology, motivation, international support, and leadership decisions, are recalculated every day. And where that calculation leads, no one can say with certainty today. Billions of dollars in defense budgets cannot replace motivation on the battlefield. It taught us that in modern warfare, a country can shift the course of a conflict not just with its artillery, but by wielding its camera and its internet connection more effectively than its adversary. But perhaps the most important lesson is this: Ukraine proved something to the world in February 2022. A state, no matter how small, no matter how severe the pressure bearing down on it, if it has real will behind it, real popular support, and chooses to stand, is far harder to break than you think. This war is not over. The front lines are still bloody. People are still dying. Cities are still being destroyed. And as we compress this reality into numbers, analyses, and strategic assessments, we must never lose sight of the fact that behind every statistic is a human life. History records how wars begin. How they end is determined, more often than not, by the people who live through them. Ukraine is still here. And that, in itself, is an analysis.